this is some resistance stuff. Like, this is a really breaking, a snapping moment. And I really like that for some of you. Some of you need a snapping moment. Like, some of you just been so stagnant and holding on to shit that, like, maybe it's time for you to snap. Welcome back to the Astrology Report, this time for January 30th through February 5th of 2023. My name is Cam White. Make sure you like this video if you like what you're seeing here. Comment below. Let me know what your thoughts are about last week and what you're excited for this week as we go through the week. This week, again, I ended off last week about being, January, end of January, beginning of February is all relatively chill. So use this time while it lasts. However, this week we have a full moon that has quite a bit to disrupt. You can look at it as good. You can look at it as bad. However, I'm more personally excited for it. But this is kind of much more of a higher point or a much more heavy energetic week than what we had last week or the coming weeks. So we're starting this week off on Monday with the moon ingressing into Gemini. It will then first make a square to Venus, and then it will sextile Jupiter, and then it will conjoin Mars. So there's quite a bit going on with the moon doing a little, again, I kept thinking of Pong or ping pong, and it's not. I'm thinking of pinball. Pinball is the game of just the moon going bing, 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 all over the place. And so the big thing here is that the moon's moving into Gemini, right? We ended last week with the moon in Taurus. And now as the moon's entering Gemini, we're kind of activating a lot of this Mars stuff. I believe this is the first moon-Mars transit now that Mars is stationed direct. So as the moon goes into Gemini, like I always say, the moon's about our emotions, our day-to-day, how we're feeling, what we're really invested into. And as it goes into Gemini, we're talking about stimulation, communication, information, anything with a shin at the end of it. And as the moon first goes into Gemini, it's going to make this square to Venus. So this might be kind of like, I was talking a little bit about last week about how, the moon and Neptune and Pisces is like watching a movie and getting involved with it. The moon in Gemini squaring Venus and Pisces is like, who's that guy? Like, you ever watched a movie with someone who's like, who's that guy? What is he doing here? What's this about? Why is that going on? You're just like, stop talking. Like, you will fucking figure it out when you watch the movie. Just shut up. That's kind of like the moon in Gemini squaring Venus and Pisces. Like, talking will kind of ruin the mood. Maybe like, if you're having sex with someone, maybe talking too much or making too many jokes is going to ruin the mood. Like, that's how I look at the moon squaring Venus here, where talking too much or, just being too distracting and not actually just like sitting in the moment might feel a little disruptive. And this is a square, so it's not the worst thing ever. Like, sometimes you do need to communicate with someone about something of like, if you're watching a movie, you have no idea, like maybe asking one question's fine, but don't be, going off and off and off or talking with someone else during the movie or on your phone in the movie theater. You know what I mean? However, the moon will then sextile Jupiter, where it might ruin the mood, but I think as the moon sextiles Jupiter, kind of getting that clarity or getting that, getting that clarity, I think will help the inspirational part of Jupiter in Aries. Like, if you're one of those people that are just super scared to ask questions, you don't want to look dumb, like it's easy for you to be unmotivated or to feel insecure about what it is that you're doing. But if you just ask for that clarity, even though it might kind of disrupt the mood for just a second, it does open up another door for you to be much more, like the Jupiter and Aries stuff, like taking action, believing in the actions that you take, being courageous. And so as the moon sextiles Jupiter, there is this kind of like, just getting that clarity and having that conversation is much more inspiring. It gives you a lot more faith. It gives you a lot more motivation. But then as we get more towards the end of Monday, the moon's going to be conjoining Mars, where this could be kind of overdoing it in some cases. Well, there's one part I want to talk about this with the moon conjoining Mars now that Mars is direct. Mars has been retrograde since the end of October, all of November, all of December, most of January. So it was retrograde for, pretty much 3.5 months. Now that Mars is direct and moving forward again, there is this sort of like retracing our steps and being like, all right, what did we do the last time that we were here? What was going on the last time? And as the moon conjoins Mars, I think there's much more of this clarity of the situation that Mars in Gemini has been about, whether, again, it just really depends on what house Mars has been retrograding in it. But as there's been this delay and this back and forth and these frustrations of, this information coming in and it's changing your opinion about this and not really sure where to go. As the moon conjoins Mars, there's this clarity around the information. There's this sort of communication that's had that makes it a lot easier to understand what you should be focusing on or where you should be placing your ambitions. The only thing is that it's frustrating. The moon Mars, it's kind of like, you're wanting to do this, you're wanting to do that, wanting to go here, wanting to go there. You're juggling all of these things. and it might be hard to focus, but it's one of those things where it's like, maybe you don't need to just sit down with one project and finish the project, but like do a little work on this project. When the motivation leaves you, do a little bit of work on this project. Do what you can, right? A lot of this Mars and Gemini stuff is just taking one step at a time. I really recommend this book. I cannot think of the author. I feel like it's Alan Carr, but I think I'm totally wrong about that. But it's called The Compound Effect. It's really good. And the book pretty much explains in like dumb terms, like kindergarten level of like, if you have a goal, let's imagine it's at the top of the staircase. In order to get that goal, you just have to take one step at a time. And he uses the analogy of like compounding interest to kind of like make it a lot more clear. And so if you don't know anything about compounding interest, also read that book because it's a great way to apply that into your own life. But as the moon conjoins Mars, feeling a little bit frustrated, feeling a little bit angsty, feeling a little bit like distracted, but it's just about doing one thing at a time. But I think now that there's this communication and there's this clarity about where we're moving forward, it's easier to move forward. So I like Monday. We go into Tuesday, and there's nothing going on when I have to talk about the moon making an aspect to the sun. There's like Tuesday, like what's that Seinfeld quote? Tuesday has no feeling. That's kind of like what Tuesday is here on the 31st. It's just the moon shining the sun. And the reason I don't talk about this much is this, the planets are much more important in terms of things. Like the sun and the moon and the moon's phases are important. But when you're just talking about the moon shining the sun, the only reason, I mean, for one, this is the literally only thing that's going on. However, to talk about that, the sun is, again, our willpower, our ego, how our energy levels essentially. And the sun and Mars have a lot of commonalities between them about like your energy, your drive, your will. But the sun is much more of like, again, think of like, after when you're out in the sun and you're playing in the sunshine, you have a lot more energy. You have a lot more of a good feeling. You're getting that vitamin D, right? But the sun's in Aquarius, so there is this really kind of low energy. But as the moon's in Gemini, there is this at least, something that you're involved in on your day-to-day that's stimulating enough to carry that energy. For example, it's snowing here in Denver. If you are expecting to, I want to go outside, I want to do X, Y, and Z, but it's snowing. It's like, all right, well, you have to do something inside. What's something that doesn't require all types of energy and all types of this motivation that you could just get done in front of you? And I think as the moon's in Gemini trining the sun, the moon in Gemini, we're talking about communication, right? Understanding, clarity of information. And I talked about this last week. Like, you don't need, like, the days that you're not motivated to do something and you do it anyway, and you shut that voice up in the back of your head and you just do it anyway, are the most rewarding days. And this isn't necessarily the day to like conquer everything and just, shut that voice up and do everything anyway. There's a part of that, but what this is really symbolizing is much more of just like something. It doesn't have to be, everything on your list, but just something in front of you to where, again, if you've got all these plans that you want to take care of, but it's snowing outside and you can't, what is something that you can do? Don't just let that be an excuse to not do anything or to not go where you need to go. Once we get to Wednesday, again, Tuesday's not really a big deal, so I really wouldn't worry about Tuesday all that much. But once we get to Wednesday, the moon will then square Neptune. It will then make a trine to Saturn, and then it will enter Cancer. So the moon squaring Neptune is always really interesting to me because the moon in Gemini squaring Neptune in Pisces is like, okay, going back to that movie analogy where you're talking in the movie, maybe that part, have you ever done this before? My sister is always like this. It's like, whenever I'm like, oh, look at this, like, and it's something that, like, to look really fast, she literally doesn't look. And then the second she looks is like right when it ends. And it's like, oh, like you literally just missed it. Or when if you're showing someone a song and then they start to talk right at the part that's like the good part. Or if you're watching a movie and someone talks over a part to ask a dumb question, but the part that they talk over is like a really key important part that like you need to understand. That's like what this reminds me of. Like the moon squaring Neptune in Gemini, or the moon in Gemini squaring Neptune in Pisces is like, when you disrupt those things, when you get yourself out of the system, same thing with like meditating, right? Like if you're going to meditate and you're going to get out of your head and get into your body and really silence everything, like, if you distract yourself just even once, it's going to be easy to get out of that zone. It's going to be hard to, continue on that path. And there might be something that's important at the beginning part of it that because you disrupted that part, more towards the middle and the end, it's not as good because you don't understand what's going on. So the moon squaring Neptune is kind of like, there's a part of it that's like, again, may not have that clarity. You might have spoken over a part that you needed to actually be listening to. But the other part of it is, and this is why I bring up this analogy, is the moon in Gemini squaring Neptune and Pisces is like confusion. Like if you watch SpongeBob, the orb of confusion is very moon in Gemini squaring Neptune and Pisces. And there's this sense of like, I'm trying, like moon in Gemini, I'm trying to understand, I'm trying to communicate, I'm trying to just think logically here. But as it squares Neptune and Pisces, there's like, I don't get it. Oh, I don't see it. Or, it could be something like even, I'm trying to think of a optical illusion that like sometimes people can be like, whoa, this is an optical illusion. And other times people can be like, I don't really see what you're talking about there. And that's kind of what this reminds me of. So there could feel like this confusion, especially if you're thinking of much more of a logical sense, that could get in your way. But right after the moon, sorry, I got to point this way. Right after the moon makes the square to Neptune, it's going to trine Saturn, where it's kind of a two-way street here. And this is what's kind of hard about this, because as the moon squares Neptune, there is this sense of confusion and not having clarity on something. But then as it trines Saturn, there's this sort of, cold, hard reality that comes in that might clear things up. And that might just be like, for example, if you're like, whoa, what's this? What's going on here? I don't know what's going on. And you're in a movie theater, maybe the guy that's next to you just doesn't answer you. And they're like, I'm not going to tell you, I'm invested in the movie. And so you just shut up and you watch anyway. And that solution becomes clear because like, the next scene is like, something that brings in that other scene that you had a question about back in. And it's Saturn. So we are talking about authorities, maturity, discipline, time, the long game here. And it's in Aquarius. And guys, we're almost done with Saturn and Aquarius. In fact, Saturn is now out of shadow. Think about that for a moment. Saturn stationed retrograde at this point here back in June of 2022. And we've had Saturn in Aquarius from March of 2020. So literally right when the lockdowns happened, to April of 2020 to May of 2020. And then I believe it was June when it retrograded back into Capricorn. And from June till December of 2020, it was in Capricorn. So then it entered Aquarius again at the very end of 2020. So all of 2021, all of 2022, and now we're at the final stretch of Saturn in Aquarius. And so we only have to deal with this energy for so much longer. In my if you're on my Patreon, I do rising sign horoscopes every single month. And if you want to support the channel, go over to my Patreon. There's rising sign horoscopes I post every month, as well as an Ask Me Anything live stream that I do every month, as well as a monthly overview I do every single month, which ends up kind of turning into an Ask Me Anything. But I mentioned in these rising sign horoscopes that like nothing lasts forever. Things will change. And what I like about this part of Saturn in Aquarius is just accepting where you're at. And knowing that this will not be the way that it is right now, because things do change. Change is the only constant in the universe. And so what I like about this end degrees of Saturn in Aquarius is like, we know it's almost over. It was a hard fucking ride. The Saturn in Aquarius transit really told the story of the lockdowns and the vaccines and all of that stuff. But we're almost done with that. And now we're moving into a completely new chapter, which is going to have its own problems. But we're finally at that point where we could start moving on. And I think as the moon trines Saturn, there is this sense of understanding that and accepting that. Like, again, the moon might square Neptune and there's this like uncertainty of what things might look like. But the moon in Gemini squaring Saturn or trining Saturn in Aquarius is like, maybe you don't have the answers. Or for example, if you're watching the movie and you don't get something, maybe not everyone's going to tell you the answer. Maybe it's just time just to shut up and watch the movie and see if it plays out for you to where you can figure it out on your own. And then after that, the moon will then ingress into Cancer. I can't point here. I'm still looking at this. My TV's still not working, so I have to point. I'm getting a little confused with my points. But the moon's going into Cancer, right? The moon rules Cancer. So we're talking about our emotions, our body, our feelings, and it's going into its domicile sign where it's about safety, security, protection, nurturing. And so this is also almost a gibbous moon now, where it's still waxing, right? It's still gaining in light. So I think as this moon goes into Aquarius, there's this time to like replenish yourself. Like We're about to have this full moon in Leo where there's all this confidence that's going to come out about us. But as the moon goes into Cancer, it's kind of just replenishing yourself, asking yourself, all right, what are your needs? What's going to make you feel good? What's going to make you feel comfortable? And not like the moon in Taurus, where this is like really like feeling that comfort and securing that. This is a Cancer moon. So Cancer is one of the signs that initiates things. So it's like, for these next 3 days, what do you need to take care of? What do how do you need to nurture yourself? What do you need to protect yourself on? Like sometimes, like, I use this analogy all the time, but just cleaning your room. Sometimes you need to be like, all right, or cleaning your house. Like, all right, I need to stop what I'm doing real quick and I need to handle this errand. I need to handle this. If you're like me, I like to just like kind of work and focus. But then there's just times I'm like, man, shit, I need to run to Target. I need to grab this. I need to grab that so I can take care of stuff. That's like the moon in Cancer transit going into Wednesday afternoon. So as we get into Thursday, the moon will then square Jupiter. It will then trine Venus and sextile Uranus. So again, a lot of pinball energy going on here with the moon this week, which isn't a bad thing. I actually kind of like the moon transits doing a lot of that stuff because it's never boring, but it's not like monumental changes in your day. Like it's just enough to be stimulating and to keep the energy going. And on Thursday, the moon is first going to square Jupiter. And the hard part about this too is there's a balancing effect, right? So the moon in Cancer is like, okay, take care of yourself, nurture yourself, take a bath, wash something, that kind of shit, right? But Jupiter in Aries is like, no, you need to go big or go home. No, you need to invest all this energy into action and starting this. And there's this balance of like, okay, don't just like sit down and do nothing. Don't just be like, I need a break and I need a rest day and I need to do nothing. And maybe there's a part of that has to happen. I think the hard part about just resting and not doing anything is you have Jupiter and Aries squaring it where it's like in the back of your mind, you're like, you need to do more. Get off your ass. This is what you need to accomplish. This is where you need to go. And so the other part of it, though, is just kind of like knowing that like, hey, I said this back earlier in January about the full moon in Cancer. It's like, in order to be efficient, in order to get the things done that you need to get done, you need to also have an equal amount of rest and an equal amount of like nourishment. Like, because if you're just going a million miles an hour, if you're, for example, with your car, if you're not doing regular oil changes and you're not putting new tires on, or if you're not doing X, Y, and Z, your car is going to break down eventually and then you're fucked. And so this is one of those times of like being like, okay, I need to get an oil change. I don't need to stop everything I'm doing right now to do that. Because I still have somewhere to go, but I need to get that done at some point this week. So it's kind of just balancing out your priorities. But then after that, the moon trines Venus, where I love the moon in Cancer making a trine to Venus in Pisces. This is like, I mean, the water stuff is so emotional. The water stuff is so intimate. And I think as Venus is in Pisces and there's this it's kind of like, snuggling up with your loved one and watching a movie and just kind of like, feeling comfy and, shit like that. You know what I mean? It feels really good. So it's like the moon squaring Jupiter is like, again, a part of that is like, yes, you should get some stuff done. Yes, you need some rest. There needs to be a little bit of a balance to that, right? Like, so don't just put everything off to rest, but also don't ignore that you need that. Because then it's like, for example, it's like, all right, maybe you need to get 10,000 things done, but you need to get your oil changed. So go get your oil changed. And then while your oil's being changed, go and hang out somewhere, go and relax for a minute and enjoy that moment on Thursday. But then after that, the moon is then going to sextile Uranus. Where the moon sextiling Uranus, especially in Cancer, again, it's a sextile. It's not the biggest deal in the world. It's the moon. So we're talking about day-to-day stuff, sextiling an outer planet. So long-term stuff. It's not the biggest deal in the world. Like this, I think I've used this analogy a few times, but the moon in Cancer sextiling Uranus and Taurus is like trying a new recipe, like trying something different when it comes to like food, or for example, like, I'm still working through, I don't like to waste things. So I'm still working through all of like my chemical cleaners, but around the end of 2021, beginning of 2022, I got a natural cleaner. So like baking soda, vinegar for like everything. This would be like something like that, like trying something new and different in terms of the Cancer Taurus stuff. So that could be food, that could be cleaning, that can just be taking care of your odds and ends. And Cancer is such a, one of my favorite examples of Cancer is back in the 50s when Uranus went through Cancer. Uranus is all about, again, technology, innovation, and liberation. And when Uranus went through Cancer in the 50s, can anyone put those two together? That was what they called the liberation of the housewife. And that was like when the washing machine was invented, or not invented, but when it was like, there was an economic boom here. People had money, so they were able to purchase these, and these were made at larger scale. So like washing machines, dishwashers, all of that stuff was really, when Uranus was going through Cancer. And we're going to have that here in like, I think another 12 or 15 years. And that's when you're going to have like an AI robot wife, and, all of your smart home technology stuff are all communicating, so you don't have to do anything. So we got another round of that. But the moon in Cancer is sextiling Uranus and Taurus against like trying a different recipe, trying a new way of doing things related to food, cleanliness, a lot of the feminine stuff, right? And I know that sounds borderline like, I don't know, misogynistic or sexist, but these are just examples, right? Like it's really important to understand where that falls into your life. But again, I'm just reading the current transits of of what's going on in the sky. It's your job to figure out how that relates to you and your life. So anyway, that's Thursday. We get to Friday, and the moon will first go opposite Mercury. That happens actually really late into like Thursday night, very early Friday morning. And as the moon goes opposite Mercury, it will then trine Neptune. And then also one of the highlights of this week is we have the sun making a square to Uranus. So this will be a little bit interesting, but on Friday, as the moon goes opposite Mercury, there is this sense of coming back to that full moon in Cancer that we had back in the second week of January, if I could think about that right. Yeah, I'd say the first or the second week of January, where Mercury was retrograde in Capricorn. And it was like, how do we be more efficient with our plans? How do we be more efficient with our systems? And that full moon in Cancer happened. And it was like, oh, I need to take care of myself in order to do that. And we're kind of revisiting that, right? It's like, all right, now that you're replenished, now that you've got like, you're rested, now it's time to go back into action. Now it's time to start laying down the law again. So that looks really exciting. And then the moon trines Neptune for the most of the part of the day. I love that. I am a absolute slut for nostalgia. Like that's why I really like vaporwave music, or like like vaporwave stuff. One of my favorite artists is Waterfront Dining. If you're on Bandcamp, you should look up Waterfront Dining. It's so good. Anyway, moon in Cancer trining Neptune and Pisces, really like nostalgic. It's kind of like really feeling good and, baking in your emotions, but it's trining Neptune where it's like idealizing these emotions and idealizing the way of feeling good. And it's like, I don't know, sometimes like all of my grandparents are dead, but like sometimes I reflect on like especially when I eat mashed potatoes. My grandma, she was like fat and diabetic. So she used to it was like half potato, half butter. And it was so good. And every time I eat potatoes, I'm like, nothing can compare to my fucking grandma's potatoes. That's all I think about when I eat mashed potatoes. But that moon in Cancer trining Neptune and Pisces is kind of like that similar thing of like doing something that feels good, that's nourishing. And there's something about, maybe it's that event that's nostalgic, or something about the past that's nostalgic. And it's kind of baking in that. Like it feels really good. I really do like this energy. And I think as the moon's in Cancer, opposite Mercury in Capricorn, where, we've got our rest, we've got our nourishment, now it's time to take action. It's kind of like being able to reflect back and be like, man, like that. This is where the rose-colored glasses can be good for things, right? Looking at things through an idealized sense can be good at times. And it's really when you see these trines to Neptune where that really happens. So I like that for Friday. But the other thing is the sun is going to square Uranus. That actually doesn't really happen till the end of the day. And there's things I like about it, and there's things I don't like about it. The thing I like about it is that oftentimes, so I'm going to be making another Pluto and Aquarius delineation. In fact, by the time you guys watch this, it might even be out. But one of my more positive delineations on Pluto and Aquarius is sometimes things have to get so bad in order for people to innovate and find a change. And so as the sun's in Aquarius and we have this low energy and, it's really stuck, right? It's Aquarius. It's a fixed sign. As it squares Uranus, this is kind of like, you can't just bend anymore. Like Uranus and Taurus is asking you to innovate and change, your values, your day-to-day habits, or not your day-to-day habits, but like your values, what you place consistency in, what makes you feel secure, and this is Taurus stuff. This could be food. This could be money. This could be, luxury goods. This could be art. And as the sun squares Uranus, there's this sense of like having to snap. Like sometimes people just have a snapping point. And this looks like kind of a snapping point of just kind of like, what? Like I've got to get out of my own way. I can't do this anymore. And for some people that might be a snap and being like, resist, resist, resist. but you don't want to have resistance, right? Like this is kind of like if you know something is going to break rather than, what's a good example of this? Like if you've got a pole right here and you've got two presses pressing against this pole, if you're trying to hold on to the pole for it doesn't snap, that's just going to snap in your face and you're going to die. Or like, for example, cutting down a tree. If you watch arborists. Anyway, arbors, we'll say, when they cut down a tree, there's a certain moment where you see that tree kind of start to bend and crack and you run away. Cause like there could be a point where that shit just snaps and then like a piece of wood just flies into your eye or like pretty much cuts your head off. And if you are trying to resist that and trying to hold on together, like that can snap in your face versus if you're just like, dude, I'm not going to resist this. Like let it just snap on its own, run away from it and let it do its thing. That's kind of like what Friday has in terms of like just willpower and your sense of self. And it's kind of a low point because again, now we're like in the dead middle of Aquarius season, but there is this sort of like, you're kind of forced to get out of your comfort zone. You're kind of forced to snap. And if you resist, I think it's going to be much more hardcore versus if you just accept it and embrace it and allow it to happen, then I think things will be easier for you in the long term. Because if you're just in resistance mode to it, then it turns into resentment and then it turns into revenge versus it's like, sometimes you just got to accept things. So we get into Saturday, and this is where Saturday and Sunday are really the highlights of this week. The moon is going to ingress into Leo, and it's going to make a trine to Jupiter. I'm loving Saturday for that, but I'm not loving Saturday for Venus square Mars, which is one of the highlights of this week. And Venus square Mars is really funny. Oh, whoops, this is the chart. As the moon goes into Leo, this is now like the moon is pretty much full at this point. Like we're talking about our emotions are really lit up, how we're feeling is really lit up. And something I really like about the Aquarius Leo axis when the sun's in Aquarius is this kind of sense of resistance. Like one of my favorite examples of a full moon in Leo was the full moon in Leo. And I believe it was the Jupiter Cazimi in the beginning of 2021. Or like the beginning of 2021 at the end of January, beginning of February. And that was the whole AMC GameStop like stock thing. Most people know about that, but if you're not familiar with that, pretty much all of like the crypto people and guys that are, got a little bit of their stimulus to like invest some money pretty much went and put all of their money in GameStop and it flew through the roof, even though GameStop is a shit stock and it doesn't mean anything. Same thing with AMC. And there was this, and it was kind of like a resistance thing of like, fuck the corporate overlords, fuck Wall Street and how they do things, like let's game the system our way. And so there is this kind of like, having enough emotional pride and courage to like go against the grain in the system. And that's what this full moon's about, which is going to be happening on Sunday. So give me a second to get there. But as the moon goes into Leo on Saturday and trines Jupiter, that courage comes back where it's like, I can resist this. We are stronger together here, which there are healthy parts about the Aquarius stuff. I know I've been very hard on the Aquarius stuff for the past 2 years, but it's also like, hey, look around. Weaponization of communities has just been so prevalent, and the authoritarian nature of communities has just been really taking over. And I'm just a Leo, so I have a resistance to that stuff. But the moon goes into Leo and it trines Jupiter, where there's this like, we can do this, or I can do this. Like I have all of this faith, I have all of this courage. And the moon goes into Leo, where our emotions are really connected to our ego. They're really connected to our pride. They're really connected to our identity. And so the moon's going to eventually go to this full moon, which we'll talk about on Sunday. But the only issue with Saturday is we have Venus making a square to Mars, which doesn't happen until about the end of the afternoon on Saturday. And so Venus and Pisces squaring Mars in Gemini is kind of like, all I can think about is a sex analogy in my head, but I'm trying to phrase it appropriately. There are people that like soft, intimate, sweet sex, and there are other people that like the counter of that. And this is kind of like when that doesn't always fit. Now, what's interesting though is like, or for example, sometimes you have to be gentle with things. Mars and Gemini can be kind of aggressive, especially like verbally, or in the way that we debate or argue or communicate, like Mars and Gemini, like aggressive communication, right? And Venus and Pisces is like, does that have to be brought up here? It's like, for example, if you've ever been to a wedding, I've DJ'd like 300 weddings, so I've seen it all. But I've seen some weddings where the best man or the best man will do a speech, and it's just like, there was one wedding I did that was really funny, and it was a military wedding. It was like the bride's side of the family was all Marines. Like everyone was decked out in all of their, you know, badges and shit like that. And the groom side was all Navy. Now, to make it more interesting was the groom was black and the bride was white. And there was just this weird racial tension in that whole room because it was like Navy, Marines, and like the race stuff. Because this is all, again, like Colorado. I'm not saying everyone's like racist, but there was like this feeling of that there. And the two dads of the bride and the groom literally fought about who was going to pray over dinner. And I mean, it was like, and they were like both generals. Like it was like, I don't know about generals, but they were both really big deals. So like they just didn't back down from one another. And then, so there was that. And then the groom comes up, not the groom, the best man. And this is a Christian wedding. Like this is a religious wedding. This is not a fun and games wedding. And the best man comes up and he gets the microphone and he goes, man, me and the groom back in high school, we used to be fucking so many bitches. And we used to, man, we were fucking huffing paint back and like smoking all this weed. And I mean, everyone's jaws dropped. And I'm over here in charge of the DJ booth. And like, it's not my job to cut off people. Like, I don't know what's appropriate or not. And I mean, he was wasted too. And so he's just going off and it was so bad. It was so bad. It was literally the maid of honor had to literally grab the microphone from him and she just went straight into her speech. She literally just took it from him and just went straight into her speech. And he was like, whoa, what the fuck? It was really bad. And then they came up to me afterwards. I was like, I didn't know if I was supposed to stop that or not, because that's like not my job, like to, you know, qualify what speeches are good or not. But I say all that of like Venus and Pisces squaring Mars and Gemini. Like sometimes things aren't appropriate to say. And sometimes it's like, you know, the Venus and Pisces, like this is a beautiful, like, especially too, if there's like, you know, aggression or hostility in a certain situation, sometimes it's not appropriate. Sometimes it's like, you know, this is a really nice area. This is a really nice, beautiful thing that's going on. We don't need to bring in the hostility, but the problem is that it's there, right? Like it's definitely there. There's definitely something that wants to be said or brought out. And so as Venus squares Mars, Venus is about pleasure and value and beauty and connection. And she's at odds with Mars, our desire, our actions, and what we're actually doing. And Venus and Pisces is like, I just want to enjoy this and soak in this. And Mars and Gemini is like, well, what about that? Well, that's stupid. And there's this. And it kind of just kills the vibe. You know what I mean? And so on Saturday, there is this like, it's like you want to feel good, but then it's like someone's ruining it for you. Again, kind of back to that movie analogy. And it's like, this is supposed to be beautiful and nice, but then, you know, when you overthink it or over question or you're too aggressive with something, it just really kills the vibe. So on Saturday, just kind of expect there to be like this weird, like feeling with stuff. But and again, I think what's interesting is that the moon goes into Leo and trines Jupiter and Aries, where it's like, I've also seen, another wedding story I had was, this is a wedding I did up in Estes Park, and it was a small wedding. It was a really nice venue, but they had a drunk uncle that like, they were like, do not give him the microphone. He's not allowed to say anything. And it was the brother of the bride was doing the speech, and the uncle, I mean, from what I understood, he was like really bad, but from what I could tell, he seemed to like be taking care of himself. Like he wasn't too, like he was super drunk, but he wasn't too like abrasive. And he like whispered something like to someone else. And he was on like the other side of the room. And the brother of the bride goes, hey, yeah, Uncle Matt, no, we're not doing that today. Okay. And I was like, whoa, like that. Okay. And then he just kept continuing with his speech. But that's kind of like this moon in Leo, you know, trining Jupiter and Aries, where it's just like, you might have to kill the vibe for a second too, just to kind of like confront something. Cause I mean, again, like when you have a microphone and you're in front of everybody, there's this sort of empowered feeling. And so on Saturday, there is this kind of incentive to like stand up, say something, be verbally aggressive. And again, there's, for example, like with that kid with the brother thing, you know, the brother of the bride, you know, maybe that was an appropriate thing to do. I don't know the family. However, I do know for the other family stuff, the military family, like, no, that was not appropriate. But this guy had way too much alcohol and he was way too confident and it just killed the vibe. So I think those are two really good examples of like knowing what is the best thing to say and when. And like, how, like he could have been like, fuck you, uncle, get the fuck out of here and all this other stuff. But he didn't, you know what I mean? He snapped. I mean, I was like, whoa, like let him cook. But you want to find the appropriate place to place this energy. And so that brings us to Sunday. And on Sunday, we have the full moon in Leo making a square to Uranus. This is some resistance stuff. Like, this is a really breaking, a snapping moment. And I really like that for some of you. Some of you need a snapping moment. Like, some of you just been so stagnant and holding on to shit that, like, maybe it's time for you to snap. And I don't mean snap as in like do horrible things, but like snap as in like, when are you going to be willing to change something about your life? Like, when is it like, I think I don't know when I referenced this. I might have referenced this in a weekly a couple weeks ago. But my sister, she's sober. She was a really, really bad alcoholic, and she finally got sober. She's like killing it at life now. And she made this post about New Year's Day. And she said, if your New Year's resolution was to stop drinking and you woke up hungover, then clearly it wasn't bad enough. And I've used that saying for other things, but I think that's a really good example of like, when does it get bad enough? Because if you've got all of these issues, but you're not doing anything about it to change it, then it's not bad enough. And some of you might disagree with that, but that's the fucking truth. Like, I'm not going to lie to you on that. Once it's bad enough, then you'll actually do something about it. But you've got to understand, what is that level of bad for you? And look at this. Full moon in Leo making an exact square. See, I'm fucking up my pointing. Making an exact square to Uranus. This is that breaking point. This is that snapping point. This is that I have this courage. I have this, this is kind of like mustering up strength and courage in like the darkest of days, right? Like the sun's in detriment here. It's like, I hate this. I have low energy, but the moon is like your emotions and it's in Leo. So there's all of this pride and it's full. So while you might be at this low point, there's this like all of a sudden really high raise with stuff. But it's squaring Uranus, where this is disrupting things. Like something I really like about, or a term I really like in economics and corporations are like disruptors, like companies being disruptors. Like there's a norm, there's a status quo, but then some company just comes in and disrupts the whole thing. I think they call like Tesla like a disruptor, and there's all types of other examples. But that's like what this is. This is a disruption. But I think this is also like a it's not an expected disruption. Like the AMC GameStop thing, that happened on a full moon in Leo. And it was like, that came out of nowhere. And that was just like people on Reddit and on, what's that Reddit channel called? Wall Street Bets or something like that. And I mean, it really did disrupt the whole system. I don't believe it was exactly squaring Uranus like this, but Uranus and Taurus, innovation around, again, stability, security, values, food, money. Look at where Uranus is at in your chart. What house is it in? And that will tell you where things are being disrupted. And this full moon is lighting up this axis of where it's at in your chart. This is the time to disrupt. This is the time to change. This is the time to say, you know what? Fuck it. What would happen if I just put all my money on black? Or what would happen if I went all in on this right now? So don't be afraid to disrupt things on Sunday. I think a lot of it is confidence. I think a lot of it is just mustering up that strength, mustering up that emotional courage, even though we're at a place where it's very low right now. It's like sun's in Aquarius, we're at low energy, and all of a sudden it's like, fuck it, we're just going to go to the AMC to the moon, GameStop to the moon kind of thing. And then, once the full moon's done, things will kind of relax and we'll go back to the low energy again. But this Sunday is just this day of just kind of like wilding out. It's just, you know what? I'm just going to change all of this and go for it anyway. So I think it's really exciting. I'm like a chaotic neutral, or chaotic good, I would say. Sometimes that stuff is just fun. Did I just pause this? No, I didn't. Okay. Then that brings us to next week. Next week, we have a lot more going on. Mercury makes a sextile to Neptune again. Mercury finally leaves shadow. So we figured out all that shit that we need to figure out. We're finally starting to move on. Mercury enters Aquarius, where much more of the Aquarius themes are really going to come alive. And Jupiter leaves shadow. This is important because Jupiter only hit 8 degrees of Aries back in like July, and then it retrograded. And now, Jupiter's been at the same part of the sky since really like February or March, or actually around April of 2022. So it's been in this one area of the sky going back and forth. We finally get to move on to something else and do something else, which I think is really exciting for next week. So with that being said, what are my final thoughts this week? I think I was pretty clear about it. I think it's time to break through. I think it's time to be courageous. I think it's time to, put all that effort in and just say, you know what, I'm going to go against the system. But know when to do it appropriately, right? Like, don't be the military wedding guy where you're just completely ruining the vibe. but don't be afraid to kind of confront something that you need to confront, even if you may not typically have that courage or that will. You might find yourself in a position where you have that opportunity to do that, just like the other wedding I was referencing. So let me know what you guys' thoughts are about this week below. Let me know what you're excited for. Let me know what you're not excited for. Make sure you like this video. If you are liking this content, make sure you subscribe to the channel. It does help me out. Follow me on Instagram. Follow me on TikTok. If you want to listen to this as a podcast form, I'm on Apple and Spotify. I'm not on Twitter anymore. I need to delete that. And Odyssey and Rumble, if you're one of those people that like the uncensorship stuff, I'm over on there too. So with that being said, I'll be seeing you guys next week.